Good afternoon, good morning, everybody. Thanks for attending. We're going to talk today a little bit about reaction chemistry in a few different ways, and what that really is going to focus on is three different types of pumping technology that you can use in the reaction chemistry world. Real quickly, I do want to talk about just a quick introduction. I am the product line manager of our pumps business. I have been in product line management, business line management for about 18 plus years with multiple organizations, many different pump companies, and been in the pump business for about 12 years, focusing on markets of oil and gas, pharmaceuticals, chemical, food and beverage. So a kind of a plethora of arenas to participate in, but it's brought me a lot of different experiences. So let's get right into things here. So let's start at the high level and work our way down. Okay, so today we're going to define the world of pumps. So pumps, as you can see here, and this is a chart from an organization back in 2016. And at that time, all pumps, anything that would be kind of classified as a pump, was $39 billion of sales. And you can see in the far left circle there are two main types of pumps. Centrifugal, which centrifugal is rotodynamic and has a rotating impeller, draws a vacuum into the inlet side of the pump and sends a fluid out at an increased pressure on the outlet. So that's basically a rotating pump. You also have the positive displacement pump, which we will focus on this area today. Positive displacement basically physically draws fluid into the pump and then forces it out of it. Within that space, though, and you can see this in the pump world, centrifugal pumps make up about 64% of the world, where positive displacements are by far only 1/3 of that, would be 21%. And then there's a mixture of others there, other types of pumps that are kind of hard to classify. But when you break out the positive displacement pump market, you can look at areas that you've got many different types there: screw pumps, vane pumps, lobe pumps, gear pumps, diaphragm pumps, peristaltic, piston pumps. The other category is actually where syringe pumps play. So we know there's a lot of syringe pumps in the world, your tabletop, your full-size syringe pumps, or the box syringe pumps. So that's how fractured the pump market is. But what we want to talk about today is a couple classifications, a couple types of pumping technology that you can use in flow chemistry, how they're used, and how key pieces of the pumps relate. As I said earlier, there's two major classifications of pumps here: the positive displacement and rotodynamic. We are definitely going to focus on positive displacement today. So as we step down a little bit, let's talk about flow chemistry in and of itself. Defining flow chemistry is an important piece here, important thing to remember. We're going to focus the discussion on how the pump relates to continuous processing, which is another word for flow chemistry. In the research we've done, and folks and customers we've talked to, and end user customers we've talked to, the pump is the heart of the reaction, and specifically the heart of the reaction chemistry. But we're going to look at a few different types of pumping technologies today. The term continuous processing is applicable to many different markets. You do it when you're creating new drugs. You do that when you're working with plastics, and you also do it in the oil and gas and chemical industries. Other terms that are similar to continuous processing is flow chemistry, continuous processing. You have reaction chemistry. And you're going to see this type of activity in any facet of the production process, whether it be discovery/R&D, scale, pilot, or even production. You'll see that out there to a certain extent, but probably more so in the discovery, R&D, and a scale pilot section of the continuum of manufacturing process. As we get into defining flow chemistry at a very high level, in flow chemistry, a chemical reaction is run continuously flowing stream rather than in a batch production. In other words, pumps move fluid into a tube where another tube joins, and the fluids contact one another in a reactor or a reactor type vessel, and a reaction takes place. And out the end of that comes something different. It's a well-established technique that's been used for years, but there's two types of processes: batch and flow chemistry. And for the most part, batch has been the most popular one. But lately, there's been significant increase in switching over processes to more flow chemistry. If we look at this chart here, this is just a very rudimentary look at the differences between batch and flow chemistry. And the far right there is flow chemistry. The diagram shows a couple of reagents moving into an area, and then the reaction mixture happening in the middle. There's key pieces to this you have to remember when you're looking at flow chemistry. You want to look at you'd be worried about the flow rates, how the materials mix, the temperature, and the resonance time. Resonance time is basically how long it takes to get through there. So when you look at that, and then some other, the classic way of doing things is batch. You put a couple things into a mixing bowl and mix them up and make things happen that way. So with flow chemistry, you're using the flow rate, the movement of the material through the reactor to create the reaction. Where here in batch, you're dumping things into a vat, so to speak, and using a mixer or some type of mixing type device to create the reaction. And one of the benefits of flow chemistry is you get uniform product. You can do long run, shorter run if you want, less contamination. It's easier to design, easier to optimize, and there's more uptime. There's less effort to start up and shut down. And you also can control, you don't have to clean, with batch, you don't have to clean the vessel out. You have a reactor, that's it. Sometimes it can be expensive. The initial setup can be expensive. There is some investment depending on the type of pumps you use. If you don't need the more expensive pumps, you can get away with the lesser expensive ones. Obviously the upfront cost is less. And there's a couple of I have some slides here to show a couple different examples of diagrams of flow chemistry. If you look at the top one in the far left here, you can see where pumps are used. Two types of pumps. They look like syringe pumps. It's a pretty nice diagram. And the materials are, the two pumps are sending materials into the microreactor, and then there's a little manual collection happening at the end of it. Okay? And then you look down to the lower right diagram, and again, you've got those look like tabletop syringe pumps, and I think even states say syringe pumps, that are pumping into a T-piece connector where a reaction is happening and pushing out to where there's a flow reactor. And then you got silver nanoparticles being developed, created in the canister there. So you're literally taking two chemicals, pushing them through a connector into the reactor, and out comes silver nanoparticles. I mean, this is very basic in how this looks, but it's used to provide illustration. Here is something that's actually an article from the Journal of Crystallization Process and Technology, excuse me, that refers to the continuous reaction crystallization of struvite. And you can see where it designates in the left there, you'll see two little pump markings that are just above the two vats, the lower vats. And that is actually designating that those are pumping in materials into a different mixing device there and out, and the pump is pushing something out into the collector. So it's a little bit of a blend between flow chemistry and batch, but it's moving through there versus just sitting in the batch and doing nothing. So there is kind of a combination of the two technologies. Here's another diagram, and this is again illustrative of, you've got three pumps pumping into 4 different types of reactors, one cooling, one heating, using ambient, and then going back to heating to create your Temafoxin there. And what you can also see there is there's different colors with the pump markings where they're labeled A, B, C in the far left. The B designates actually, to me, and then the way I read this, is a different type of a pump. It could also mean a hazardous material, or it's heated, but I look at that as the third type of pump. Excuse me, because you can have any type of pump kind of moving the fluid through the process, depending on what you need. And here's what we're going to talk about that. We're going to drive into that a little bit. So let's rolling it back up to the top about flow chemistry. There's a few key parts to a flow chemistry application. First, the pump you need the pump to have a constant flow of the solvent, reagent, or materials. And you really need to make sure you dial in the flow rate and the chemical resistance of the pump. Those are critical pieces. to success of your flow chemistry application. You need some type of a mixer to put reagents in contact. So, you can use mixers per se with blades and spin them around, or as we saw earlier, you can run them through a T-piece or run them through a microfluidic reactor or a larger reactor for faster mixing to cause things to kind of start to happen before it gets to the collection device. You need a reactor where the action takes place, which can be part of the mixer, so to speak, and different forms and types of materials and how that would happen. And then many times you want to use a back pressure regulator to pressurize the system. So but the key piece we're going to talk about today is the pump. And we want to get into that a little bit. Okay, so pumping technology. Let's talk about, there's 3 or 4 different types of technologies I'd like to talk here about. And I'm going to we're going to relate them to how they're applicable in flow chemistry. And then the next step for us is to talk about the key pieces of each of those technologies and see how it relates. So let's look at syringe pumps. Syringe pumps, many advantages and a few disadvantages. The advantages are long-lasting design. It's a very basic design, gear-driven design. We've been doing it for a long time. Of all the different types of pumping technology out there, it is considered to be the closest to pulseless as possible, if not pulseless. Very, very precise flow and higher pressures you can reach to. Many syringe pumps, depending on the market you play in, you probably wouldn't use 30,000 PSI in the pharmaceutical market, but you might use it in the oil and gas market. So the syringe pumps are able to do that. And I'm not speaking about tabletop syringe pumps where you just throw out the syringes. These are full-blown gear-driven syringe pumps. Disadvantages can be initial investment can be high. Sometimes the footprints are large, but if you need that precise flow or you need the pulseless flow, this is where you need to look when you look at the different types of pumping technology. And how in sample applications in flow chemistry, you create an extremely small fluidic stream for microfluidic applications, very, very precise and steady and straight. You can precisely dose viscous substances under high pressure also. So if you have like a tarry or a gummy type substance, a syringe pump is a good way to get that done, okay? When you need very precise flow. Reciprocating pumps are another type of technology. Some people call them piston pumps. Basically, it's like a train engine. The piston pulls back, wheel moves, piston pulls forward, keeps moving. Advantages for that, they can go to higher pressures, up to 10, 15,000 PSI. It's a very common design, very proven. It's a long-lasting design. Many different materials are available. If you need to be worried about chemical compatibility, whether it be stainless steel, titanium, PEEK, Hastelloy is available out there, and there's others. I will tell you though, and this is something to consider when you're looking at your application, if you have viscous fluids that you're going to need to pump, and you don't want to spend the money for the syringe pump, this is not a technology you'd want to look at. For the most part, these pumps have check valves in them, and they will get gummed up with viscous fluids. That's just the way check valves are designed. Unfortunately, that's what happens. And it's not a pulseless flow. You can add a pulse dampener to the device, whether it be inline or on board, and it will reduce some of the pulsation to a point. But for the most part, you're not going to get the pulseless flow that you would in a syringe pump. Again, applications here, just feeding the reagents in the application, and some pumps, like we have a Raxis series here at Teledyne ISCO, that can just provide the pressure. It doesn't kind of constant flow, it's a constant pressure mode. So if you just need to pressurize the lines to move the material through, you can use the device for that. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about how you're designing your application. Excuse me. A third type of technology is peristaltic technology. This is a very basic technology. A roller squeezes a tube and pulls material and out pushes material. Kind of like pushing stuff through a toothpaste tube. Great advantages here. No wetted parts. All the material and fluid stays in the hose. So you have easy interchangeability, interoperability of the pump with their different applications. You have a myriad of hose options from the standpoint of chemical compatibility, wash down, FDA, all of that. Very low downtime, low maintenance. But there's drawbacks to this. The great things, the advantages of technology, there's drawbacks. Your hose wear life will vary sometimes. It's not a pulseless application. You have the continuous rolling. You'll have the peaks and steady up and down. But I will tell you, when you are talking about viscous materials, this is where you want to go. This is the type of product you want to use when you're talking about viscous materials. Makes it easy to push it through the tube. And you can change the roller rate to make things happen a little faster or slower, but it works out good. Lastly, here's a technology that doesn't get used very often in flow chemistry, but it can be used. It's a diaphragm pump technology. It's basically a piston pump, but it's using the piston to vibrate a bladder in and out to pull material in, push it out, pull material in, push it out. Very similar. It's going to be used for feeding material into an application. You'll see these more on the production level scale because you get higher flow rates. But as with reciprocating pumps, this style typically has check valves too. So viscous materials are just not going to work here. So in our discussions, let's just talk about one thing real quickly. We talk about viscous materials. I talked about 4 technologies. There's only 2 that you really would want to use, either peristaltic or syringe. So that's the kind of thinking you need to have as you're coming into it. So let's take this down another level here, and let's get into some of the nitty gritty. What things should we be asking ourselves, and what features of a pump or mechanisms of pump can affect my flow chemistry process? First off, there's many, many, many variations, like a mad scientist creating many different types of variations for these products. First, we want to understand what's the goal of the setup. Do you need to be just moving fluid? So that's a different type. That's one mindset to decide your technology. Precision. When you hear precision, I talked about 4 types of technologies, and which one was stood out? That's correct. Syringe pumps. Or a hybrid. So if you use a few different types in the same application. So you need to understand that goal. What's more important, staying in budget or the success of the project? Now, we always want the project to be successful. Now, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is, are you not worried about how much you spend and you just need to get the mixture right, the precision right, and everything else? Or are you saying, okay, I've only got X this much, I've got to make the most happen I can with this amount of dollars? That's what has to be determined. Then you walk through your budget, the vendors you talk to, what's your timeline, et cetera, what types of pumps you're looking for. Other types of installation questions that you want to think about as you're designing this, and you want to have this conversation with the vendors you choose. How much room do you have? Do you have limited space in the fume hood because you're adding a big reactor, or you have to have a scale, you have to have a few different valving options? Is the material being moved aggressive or corrosive? That's a very key point. That's a safety issue you need to make sure you stay on top of. Does the material need to be heated, cooled, or maintained at a constant temperature? Does it affect the application or the success of it if the material is not heated? Is there particulates in your fluid? Is it viscous? Those are 2 things that would, you would eliminate using check valves, as we talked about earlier. Is it a hazardous area application? What's the classification? Is there an adjoining area? Would you have to specially mount the product somewhere? And is there a long distance to worry about cover between the pump and the controller? Where are you going to control the device versus to where the pump is? Sometimes people have controllers in other rooms, and that's something you need to understand. So as we get into, we think about these questions here, there will be others that we want to consider, but those are some ones you want to look at as you're going into front forward. Let's get into the application considerations for flow chemistry. So as a review, a little egotistically speaking here, pumps are the most important part of a continuous processing system. They are the heart of the reaction. You need to move material at some rate, some manner, somehow, and you will do that with a pump. Okay, but consider the things you need to consider when you're selecting a pump in different types of pumping technologies: accurate flow rates, maximum chemical compatibility, minimal pulsations if that's important to you, different range of pressures, the footprint, and the communication capability. These are all key pieces you need to be identifying and talking about. So let's look at these a little bit on an individual level. Okay, flow rate. It's a key component of success of a continuous process system. How fast the material flows through, or how fast the varied flow rates of 2 or 3 different types of materials. You could have one chemical A, chemical B, chemical C, need to be moved into the reactionary area at different rates, and which would also mean that different volumes of those materials are going to go into the reactionary area, and you need to make sure it's precise. Or maybe not. Maybe you don't need it to be precise, but that's a consideration. Go back to what we talked about, the questions you need to ask, because precision will determine the type of pump you use. Incorrect flow rates, even non-accurate or non-steady, can mess up the actual reaction that occurs. It can also kind of affect the composition of the material. There are chemicals out there that if not moved at the right rate or combined at the right rate, can become gummy, volatile, etc. You need to understand the flow rate you need and how to adjust it and monitor it. You have to determine that first, because there's different ways, the different methods. The syringe pump will flow at one level, and flow rate is closely tied to pulsation. So if it's okay if there's a blip or if there's not a blip, that's, we have to determine that. Other parts of flow rate is a resonance time. The time the reagents spend in the reactor. Is it a slow time, so a mix is slow, it takes longer? Is it a larger reactor? Is it a small microfluidic reactor, or is it a larger microfluidic reactor? And you have to adjust your flow rate for that. And again, pulsation would come into play there, because if you have blips, you'll have inaccurate amounts of material going through your reactor at a time. So that can really, really affect how things are mixed. You can regulate the flow rate by adding a valve, adjust it through the pump, or just changing the viscosity of the fluid. Again, if you change the viscosity of fluid, there's a couple pumps that you really might not want to use. That depending on how much flow, how much material, or how the volume of material you're going to be using. Okay. In the plastics world, the flow rate can affect the color dissipation. When you're looking at extrusion process and you're dosing chemical colors or UV chemicals into the extrusion process, you need a uniform color for the most of the time. So you have to have a very precise pump and account for either the pulsation or eliminate it. Pulsation, funny, that's the next slide. It's pulsation in a continuous process is the harbinger of the process. It can actually make or break it. If the materials do not have enough stability and a small blip can affect them, then you're going to be very focused and worried about pulsation. Inconsistent flow can definitely change the outcome of a continuous processing application. You can add pulse dampeners in many cases, sometimes inline, sometimes to the product itself. Those will minimize it to the best of their ability, but there's a certain technology we talked about today. We talk about the syringe pumps. That is very pulseless. Okay. Just to give you an idea, this is an older chart we did here, showing you the variation in pulsation at a 2 milliliter flow of 1500 psi, and then 0.2 milliliter flow at 3000 psi. Big difference. You can see the blips between the three, and that makes it, that'll make a big difference in your flow rate. Excuse me. Chemical compatibility. So when you look at the three different types of technologies that we talked, and we're going to focus in on, we won't focus in so much on diaphragm, but let's talk about syringe, reciprocating, and peristaltic. Chemical compatibility is very, very important. You do not want to have a chemical inside the syringe of a syringe pump that's eating away the syringe, especially the pressures that you can get to there. That's a very dangerous situation. Same goes for peristaltic pumps, when the hose getting eaten away by the material that you're using. And if you're not using the correct hose material, so you really need to understand and consider, the chemical compatibility of the material you're using versus the material you're pumping. Now, in some cases, in the reciprocating pumps that are out there, the piston pumps and the syringe pumps, you can have different head material, fluid path material like Hastelloy, PEEK, PTFE, stainless steel, titanium, which will help that. But you also have to remember, and please keep this in consideration when you're looking at the type of pump you're going to use, you want all of the components in the fluid path, including the seals, to be chemically compatible. That's especially important in syringe pumps. If you're using a continuous flow system, you need the valving and tubing to be chemically compatible too, because the materials will go through there. Lots of times that gets forgotten. And it's the same thing goes for peristaltic pumps. you need the hose to be fully compatible with the product that you're using, right? I always caution you, if there's ever a question, it only takes 5 seconds to look at a corrosive chart with the materials you're using and the material you're going to be pumping it with, whether it be Hastellane, Electronic 50, any of that stuff. It's easily out there. Or if it's a hose for peristaltic pumps, different types of hoses are available out there. Some are more chemically compatible than others. And it just depends on how much compatibility you need and how much protection you would need to make your project safe. Piston pumps, you just have to worry about the head itself. It's a very small flow path, so keep that in mind. If you need continuously flowing material, you know, you can buckle a couple of syringe pumps together to make a dual system. You see a picture there. There's actually 2 dual systems there. And make sure you're considering your valve options and make sure the tubing and the valving and everything else is all compatible with the material. But also the piston pumps have single head or dual head options. You could kind of daisy chain two single heads together or get one dual headed pump in the box. If you look at the Reaxis LD, that's a dual headed pump. And it gives you a continuous flow, and you can synchronize them to be at the same or alternating pulsations that allows the fluid to keep continually moving. You really don't have a continuous flow option when it comes to peristaltic unless you kind of daisy chain a few together, which it might not be the most efficient. You may be better off doing that with a Reaxis with the piston pump, the dual-headed piston pump. Talk about space constraints. You know, labs get crowded nowadays. There's a lot of bigger products out there. You know, there's a few different ways to handle that. You know, a syringe pump, the syringe pumps that are out there in the market, the Teledyne ISCO one can be mounted upside down horizontally, and it doesn't affect how it works. I don't think you can say that about a piston pump or a peristaltic pump, but you can definitely say that about the syringe pump. So, and there's alternative pump options out there. If you can sacrifice some of the precision and the pulselessness just to fit it into your fume hood, you could set up a piston pump with a pulse dampener on it to get down as close as pulseless level as you can and still save yourself some space. They're small, much smaller than the syringe pumps. Peristaltic pumps are even smaller in most cases, or they can be as big as the piston pumps. But for the most cases in labs, you would see the smaller ones. High viscosity. This one's pretty easy. We talked about this a lot. I kind of hit this home quite a bit about viscosity and different types of materials. You know, syringe pumps and peristaltic pumps are great for highly viscous materials, and even more so here at Teledyne ISCO, we have some pumps that are designed for high viscosity. They have larger ports that allow more material to come in, or they have heated jackets. You can do a heated jacket on the pumping heads for the Reaxis, which will change the viscosity of the fluid as it goes through the head. You want to just make sure you have a cooling mechanism to get it back to where you need it to be. And in peristaltic, that is the pump for viscous materials. You can probably push gum through there if you really needed to. So there's 3 different ways that if you're worried about highly viscous materials in your flow chemistry application, this is how I would take a look at it. And I would say probably if you weren't so worried about pulsation, peristaltic pump is the way to go. Fluid structure. Sometimes you have applications where you have to keep materials suspended and can't let it gum up under the bottom or inside the pump because it will jam up some of the valves or anything else. The only pumping technology we talked about today that can do this, or that has an adaptation for it, is you can install a mixer on the pumping cylinder for the syringe pumps. And it's actually we only have it in 2 versions, a 500D and 1000D, and it works pretty good. And you can actually mix the fluids in the syringe because it'll create a vortex for you, a continuous vortex that keeps the fluids in the state you want to change them to as it gets pumped in and pumped out. So this is a nice little option that you can use if that's something that might save you some dollars. Sometimes people use this method to combine some steps in the process. As we come into the home stretch here, a couple other things, some other things you want to look at when you're thinking about flow chemistry and the pumping technology. Is what other equipment do you need? What is the project cost? Because, all right, am I going to spend 80% of my budget on pumps to get pulseless? Or am I going to spend 50% of my budget to get a couple pumps to do what I need to do? So you got to kind of weigh those out. How are they going to be controlled? Is there interoperability in my back-end system? A big term today nowadays is GMP. Does the pump or the process need to be mobile? Do you need to be able to build it onto a rolling stand or a table? That's a very interesting application where you can move it from lab to lab, room to room. Is the pump capability scalable? So I would say any of the pump technology we talked about today can be scalable. It depends, excuse me, on what the percentage of scalability is. I mean, if you're going to try to increase the process by 300%, that might be more difficult than the other ones. Also worry about location changes, hazardous location changes. That's very, very important. I cannot stress that. Some things that we underestimate when it comes to installing pumps or designing our application is the hazardous location ratings. So as we wrap up here, I do want to express to you that Teledyne ISCO has a very broad pump offering today. We have a full range of high quality pump options that can pump multiple materials, and they're made of different materials of construction. So you have availabilities of different types of chemically compatible materials, plus different types of pumping technologies. Many times when you're setting up a full chemistry application, as that one we saw there, you would have 2 or 3 different types of pumps. Then the flow rate coming in at a different flow rate or a different condition of the material. Our pumps can handle that. We can handle most materials and applications. And as our company grows into the future, we will become or are becoming your pumping solution provider. We have a full gamut of options for you. So please be sure to reach out to us. How you would do that here is we can help you. Just reach out to us. You can go to our website. There's a bunch of technical bulletins out there, some application notes on previous applications that pumps have been used for. We also have, I've done a lot of research on Google Scholar, listened and read to the latest academic research. Pretty easy to do. And then we have a lot of experienced people on board here in our organization that can help even talk you through your application. If you're not sure if there's something out there that can be used, we'll be glad to talk to you about it. We can help you find the best solution. So with that, I'd like to kind of move us forward to questions at this point in time.
And while we wait for questions to come in, I just want to remind you that this is being recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel later on this week, along with all previous webinar recordings. So if you have any other, pump questions or topics that you might be interested in, it's very likely that there is a video available on Teledyne ISCO's YouTube page.
So actually, I do have a question that came in. It's more of talk a little bit about this application. It says, you talk about using multiple pumps in one application. Can you give us an example? So I'll give you an example. I was visiting one of our end customers. I love to get out in the field and see how our product's being used and talk to the people that are playing with it, using it, so I can kind of, learn to say, okay, do we need to do things better? Is there something else out there that we can, how we can help solve the pains? This customer was talking to us about an application. They were creating a new drug or doing a drug discovery. And there was one material they needed to have real solid precise dosing on. So they were using one of our ISCO syringe pumps, which was great to see. But then they explained to me that we only needed super precision for the one. So we kind of went in through and changed some different applications, different types of pumps. That's okay. What are they? Because they weren't ours. And that's okay. What are they? And they talked to us about they were using a piston pump, like an HPLC pump, which is kind of similar to what we have in the Reaxis line. And they were just a steady movement of a reagent going in. And I said, okay, so that's good. So you got 2 different types. Well, what else are you using? And they said, well, they kind of smiled a little bit, and they said, well, we actually are using 6 peristaltic pumps to dose 6 other types of materials and chemicals in to make this all come together. And I said, well, what are their functions? They said, basically just moving material. They're a generic pump that's moving material. And I said, you don't worry about the flow, the steadiness of the flow or anything else? Nah. And they said, we really like the fact that, when we're done with those 6 or we're done with one of them, we just take the hose out, put a new one in. Nice and easy. That's really cool. So I said, so you're actually using 3 different types of pumping technologies in 3 different atmospheres or environments within the same experiment, the same discovery process. And they said, yeah. And I said, well, I said, how common is that? And they said, very common. It happens all the time. the guy looked at me and said, you won't always see 6 peristaltic pumps. You might see 2 syringes. There's a mixture of things. But you can intertwine the different technologies within the same application. So I thought that was a really, really nice case, and I wanted to share that with you. So it kind of tells you that you don't have to have all syringe pumps or all reciprocating pumps for your application. Any questions? Any more questions? Oh, we do have a question here about what about disposability, like disposable heads or disposable type materials. I said, well, I was at Interfex back in April, and there was a lot of conversation about that with customers. I say the closest we have with that is the peristaltic pump, where you can take the hose out, throw it away, and put a new one on. It takes a couple minutes to do that, very easy to change. At this point in time, we do not have anything where you can take the head off the piston pump or take the syringe off the syringe pump. But as time goes on, I mean, that's something that's an interesting thing to think about. But how we address that today is actually taking the hoses off the peristaltic and put a new one on. That's as disposable as we get. So if you're looking for something outside of that, unfortunately, we don't have that. But there are other types of pumps out there that can do that. I think that's, I don't see any more coming in here. We'll give it one last shot if anybody has any questions or comments. And feel free when you're, if you're listening to this afterwards or you're still on the line listening to me, feel free to send topics over too. If there's things you want us to talk about, a little more focused or broader, or just give us some ideas of things we can, and if we can put together a nice little webinar that's helpful, we'll do that for you. Along with, if you have any questions, please reach out to us. I'll be glad that they will get to me, and I'll be glad to get them answered for you.
Yeah, and to piggyback on that comment, we're always looking for feedback on our webinars. So as you leave the webinar today, you will be prompted to go fill out a survey on the webinar that you've just attended. So I really encourage you to do that. That way we can be sure, like Nick said, we're presenting topics that are of interest to you and are going to help you learn more about pumping technology. So please, I encourage you to do that after this webinar today.
Well, I don't see more questions here. I want to thank everybody for attending and listening and taking the time to listen. I hope even at the smallest micro scale that this was helpful for you. If not, or if it was, great. If not, let's reach out to us, let us know, and we'll be glad to help out too. And I thank you for listening, and I thank you for the support of our business.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.